أنا عم بربط موضوعين مع بعض، اللي هو أول شيء الجهل بالثقافة إضافة إلى عدم الإيفاء بالوعود والتسرع باختيارها والأذى اللي بيلحق اللاجئين. النقطة الأخيرة بدي أفشل لأنه كتير هون أنا تعوقت. إذا بده يعطيني 5 دقائق رئيس الجلسة عشان أعطي بعد مثلين.
دقيقة معك
دقيقة. طيب دقيقة بدي أحكي شوي عن الميسرين. الميسرين للحقيقة كمان في إشكالية. الميسرين بدي أعطي مثال إنه في كتير أمثلة عن إلى علاقة بلباقة الباحثين وإلى علاقة بسلوكهم، يعني كنت حابب أقولها بس فيش وقت. بالنسبة للميسرين، في كتير من الميسرين يعني بتصرفوا إنه هن زي ما قلت لك، هي أنت عجبتك زي الضمنان، هيك شو بقولوا بستان أو ضمنان شوية زيتون، بيستفيد من وراء اللاجئين. فيعني رحت أنا مرة مع شخص بده يعمل بحث، فتنا عند عائلة والعائلة طوع يعني كانت ممتعة بتناسب البحث بدها تشتغل، فقاموا قالوا لنا ما فيكم انتم بدكم تروحوا تشوفوا فلان. شو خص فلان؟ قال هو منبه علينا احنا، لانه بصراحة ما فيناش الا اذا بده يجي حدا بده يحكي عن طريقه. فبعدين انا صرت اعرفه هذا الشخص. رحت مرة عم بعمل مقابلة ثانية، بدي اعطيك كذا مثل، فهو جاب لي بيوم 50 مقابلة، طلعت عليهم امه واخته وابوه واخوه وعمه وكذا وهاي. قلت له طول بالك هذول بدك تعيدهم لانه انا ما بدي مصدر واحد. مرة ثالثة ذات الشخص اللي هو معروف جدا، رحت انا وياه على الناس، فلانه الحكي بصير بالعربي، الباحث الاجنبي ما بفهم هذول الاشياء. فاجت المرة قالت له انا ما طلع لي كرتوني المرة الماضية. قال لها خلص بس نساوي هاي المقابلة ان شاء الله انت ولا يهمك. بس قلت له لا طول بالك، هاي ما خاصة بالكرتوني، انا ما خصني ما ترد عليه، اذا ما بدك تعمل المقابلة ما تعمل. هذا الديناميكية اللي بتصير من تحت الطاولة او بالعربي من وراء من خارج يعني وعي الباحث، بتأثر على موضوع البحث وعلى نتائجه، لأنه ممكن يكون عم بيجيب ناس غير ممثلين ولا يخدموا البحث، وهو بالنسبة له بيعرفش عربي، فبيقبل أي شيء وبيطلع بقول لك النتاجات كذا وكذا حسب ما بهيمن الباحث عليه. طب أنا راح أوقف هون، بس بدي أقول بعض الخلاصات، واحدة بس بدي أقول يعني الفكرة، الخلاصات اللي بدي أقولها إنه لابد إنه أول شيء يكون في مرجعية بحثية بالمخيمات بتمرق من خلالها هاي الأبحاث. احنا ما بدنا نقول ممنوع البحث، بس يكون في عن جد حدا براقب الباحثين، شو مواضيعهم شو سلوكهم، يكون في بوابة، لأنه هذا زي ما قلت له علاقة بحياة الناس وبمستقبلهم، مش مطلوب يكون فالت لهالدرجة. واثنين، يعني أنا بقول لو كل مخيم بشتيلة أخذ صورة أو فيلم أو بحث عن اللي انعمل بشتيلة، كان مكاتب الناس ملانة بس مش موجود، ما حدا بيعرف وين هاي الأبحاث. فلا بد من إنه منظمة التحرير أو الجهات المرجعية تعمل داتابيز تجيب هاي الأبحاث تكون موجودة بمكان وينشاف شو تحقق منها وشو منها. أنا آسف للإطالة، يعطيك العافية، شكرا.
رح نبلش بالكلمة الثانية مع محمد علي نايل، كاتب وصحفي مستقل.
مرحبا. Hi, Sabaho. I hope the coffee will all down this morning is already kicking in. I'm personally wired, so if you see me shaking or drenched in sweat, don't worry about me, it's the caffeine. Before I start today, I would like to thank the Institute of Palestine Studies for giving me this opportunity to write and present this paper and this topic that is of high importance to me. And I look forward for criticism and opinions once I present and publish this paper. Today I would like to talk about the invisible hands in knowledge production.
في ترجمة.
بس لأنه فكرت وكتبتها بالإنجليزي. سوري، بس لأنه فكرت وكتبتها بالإنجليزي ما تأخذني. Okay. Following years of assisting foreign researchers and journalists in producing knowledge across Lebanon, I have spent a substantial time working in Palestinian refugee camps. It all started back in summer of 2006, just after the war ended. My volunteering experience during and after the war opened my eyes towards new prospects about Lebanon and about myself in Lebanon, and so I decided to reinvent myself. I wanted to become a journalist. I discovered a passion of writing, and I decided to tell stories, something that I really liked. And so, for lack of finances and privilege to go to university, I decided to become a fixer and translator with foreign journalists and researchers. As you all know, following the 2006 war, there was a massive influx of international journalists, researchers, international NGO workers, and many other people from across the world who had a certain interest in Lebanon. So this is where I started my career as a fixer, and this is how I decided to learn. This is how I decided to learn the craft of investigative journalism. I started working, as I said, a fixer with researchers and journalists from across the world. And so, as my experience grew, my naivety slowly disappeared, and my knowledge grew much bigger. So, after the hype of Israel war on Lebanon receded, the next story that I was contacted for was the Palestinian camps. Whenever I introduced a researcher to interview Palestinian refugees, there was something awkward about the word researcher, bahith. People would look at me and say, what is he researching? What does it mean that he's a researcher and came to talk to us? And so I discovered later that this awkwardness is a result of alienation, that the term researcher rings as hollow and devoid of direct content. My years of experience created a realization that most of the research and journalistic work that I worked with was done for the sake of research, a means to advance personal academic credentials for the establishment of personal careers. Many researchers are confronted with the question by Palestinians, how come so many researchers from across the world have walked into our camps week in, week out, but the situation is still the same, actually deteriorating to worse conditions. I worked for 9 years with researchers and journalists inside Palestinian refugee camps, and I can't remember any topic that I worked on had to do with matters that are of interest to the Palestinian refugees themselves, things like self-determination and self-agencies. Such themes for researchers and journalists, I was told, were too political or particular issues that my institute won't fund. Through my 9 years of assisting and producing knowledge, I realized that this knowledge was produced for personal and advancement and career advancement. Palestinians, and I also noticed a pattern where Palestinians cynically marvel why these people continue to come to our camps. How come we don't benefit from it? Unfortunately, through an extensive experience in fixing and translating, my belief in the power of the word took major blows. The setbacks resulted from the fact that people's stories, to the vast majority of researchers and journalists I encountered, was nothing but an establishment of the researcher's career, utilizing people's lives and grievances to serve that careerist end. Among Lebanon's 12 Palestinian refugee camps, from my own experience, the utmost attention was given to two camps, Shatila and Ain al-Halwa, by researchers or foreign journalists. And I noticed Ain al-Halwa was favored mostly by American journalists and researchers, especially those who researched for think tanks that lobbied and influenced America's global war on terror. In Western foreign policy discourse, Ain al-Halwa, as I learned from researchers and journalists, was labeled as a terrorist hotbed. This reputation was the result of two Islamist movements who were based in the camp. One of them is called Asbat al-Ansar, attracted the attention to the camp after it was put by the United States on the list of terrorist organizations following September 11. And so after 2007 war, Nahr al-Barid, many of my customers were mostly young freelance journalists who were fresh out of the UK or US School of Journalism. Ain Halwi was on top of their list. The camps fabled as spooky and suspicious were basically a career launching pad. Then, the invocation of a trip to Ain by both practiced and rookie upstart was announced with an air of adventure as a voyage to the heart of darkness. This misrepresentation of Ain Halwi camp is dangerous because the West designating the camp as a terrorist hotbed dehumanized the camp's inhabitants. And Ain Halwi took a life of its own in the imagination of the West. This Orientalist perception took shape when Ain Halwi became a research topic of a book called Everyday Jihad by Bernard Rogier, focusing on a fraction of the camp that hosted a handful of Islamist militants. The book's fame is a result of the author's claim to track the rise of militant Islam among Palestinians in Lebanon. The book mainly focuses on a segment of the Rawi camp inhabited by families and clans who have kept their familiar ties since before Nakba. The more the war on terror made the news and occupied front pages and headlines, more readers of Everyday Jihad flocked into Lebanon, wanting to go to Ain Halwi, interview and research terrorists based in the camp. The result of this conduct, I noted, embraced the surge of attention projected. The result of this conduct, I noted, through many meetings with Islamists in Ain Halwi was that those marginalized groups were non-existent in the knowledge of the general population, embraced that surge of attention by foreign researchers and journalists. And during interviews, the researcher insisted on mulling over for hours, trying to catch a scoop or unravel some sort of conspiracy that never happened. In turn, the Islamist person took advantage and spread his propaganda. So the journalists and the researchers I worked with saw the camps only from a terrorist gaze. Palestine simply waned and was reduced to a non-worthy status. Then there was Shatila. And Shatila, on a slow news day, I used to get journalists call me and say, let's go to Shatila and find us some Salafis to talk to. Again, this camp is viewed from a narrow security angle. It's also the go-to camp for academics and researchers who have a knack for convenience because of the proximity of the camp and ease of access. They would go in the morning and do some research and then in the afternoon hang out in Beirut bars while they type their notes. My next point is on the approach by researchers. In my opinion and through my experience, Palestinian refugee camps have become a fetish hub for foreign journalists and researchers. And I'm here speaking strictly about mainstream journalists and researchers that I worked with. Many of those reduced the camps to baskets or enclaves of security. And their reductive observations eliminated Palestinians out of their camps, and they are replaced by the terrorist persona of the Western imagination. Self-determination and the realization of the right of return are photoshopped out of the imagination of Western journalists and researchers. Only jihadi Islamists make the camp a place worthy of narration and research. One Friday in 2008, while walking out of Ain Halwi, I asked the American journalist I was working with, how come you don't write about the results of Israeli occupation of Palestine and the ongoing human suffering Palestinians have been enduring ever since? That is very visible all over the camp. His answer is precisely the embodiment of this kind of superiority complex. He said, the Palestinians are incompetent. They lost the war. Israel won. The Israelis earned it. It's a redundant story. There's nothing to tell anymore. The superior approach toward Palestinian refugees is perhaps best exemplified in self-entitlement that lurks over interviews. People's time and hospitality are disregarded as worthy of appreciation by the researcher or journalist. This can cause interview without cohesion between the interviewer and the interviewee, and thus they can become a burden. It makes people reluctant to speak and open up to researchers. As such socially awkward setups, some researchers assume that people's reluctance to speak is because they are not telling the truth or they are not trying hard enough. And so as a fixer, I was urged to remind the refugees about the prestigious institutes, universities or newspapers the interviewers came from. And they suppose that that air of pomposity is supposed to intimidate or belittle people. And this is precisely the reason why people walk away. I noticed people walk away from researchers. And so in the role of producing knowledge, a fixer role is instrumental into the production of this knowledge. To fix is to convince people to talk, to open up their lives and showcase all their wounds. A fixer has to keep tongues rolling until journalists get their punchline, be it sensationalist or not. It's about fixing people to remain open until the researcher had had enough and is able to sift through thousands of words and choose a paragraph, and that will fit the argument I'm making in my paper. As a fixer, I was told by my employer to convince people to talk or make them talk. There were a few times when the project or the interview had hit an impasse, I was told to translate, tell them this is for the benefit of Palestine and the cause. My paper will be read by many. Such abstract promises about the benefit the research will endow on Palestine turned me and the researcher I was working with into a laughingstock, until I stopped translating such bizarre claims. But then the most embarrassing of all is when a researcher and a journalist get desperate. And so at this they try desperate measures, and some of them try to bribe people into talking. There was a time when a journalist put his hand inside his pocket and pulled out a bunch of crumpled receipts and Lebanese money notes that he couldn't figure out, and he pushed it on me and said, "Here, see if this will make them talk." This is all I got. A few times people accepted money and went on telling whatever the researcher wanted to hear. This gets the job done in no time. The researcher is fed stories, anecdotes and testimonies, exaggerated and sensationalized, fueling a nodding head and a scribbling shorthand. On occasion, later on, as my naivety shattered, I protested about bribing people to talk simply because when money is involved, the truth is no longer a fact. And so, this is the point that I want to make today is that when people get paid to talk, they want to give back in return to what they are paid for. And so there are some fixers have a set of fixed people in different camps that they bring different researchers and journalists to meet and interview over and over again. It's a convenient setup. People get a return for their time. The fixer does the job in no time, and the researcher, journalist, gets what they came from in a quick time. Only the truth is the biggest loser in such knowledge production engagement. Once a fixer told me it's amazing what a $10 can do, and he noticed my resentful face. He said, at $20 I can get you a scoop. Bribing people is one way of getting people talking, but sometimes the journalists or researchers start dropping promises as, would you like to go live abroad? Tell me your story. My paper will be read by many people. Once I publish it, I'll try to get you out of this camp. In 2010, I had an incident that made me stop a misleading narrative from being produced. Back then, I was working with an American journalist who came to Lebanon to report on social media, and so she decided to go to the camps. She heard about the camps in Lebanon and decided to go from Jemaise to Shatila. It took us 10 minutes in the car. Once we were there, she simply asked me, where is the camp? I told her, this is the camp. She said, where are the tents? At this point, I decided to intervene for the first time and stop her from writing another misleading story. And as a result, I wrote against other misleading stories that she actually wrote about Lebanon, a Lebanese story. And that created a bad influence and a bad reputation to me as a fixer, because this was my source of living. I was kind of disheartened, and I thought there's so much injustice to talk about, but then at the same time, if I keep exposing journalists, I'm not going to get work anymore. Sorry, I still have one more point to make, and I'm out of here. There was another incident by a researcher, professor from Harvard, where it exemplifies this kind of misconduct, where Palestinian refugees are basically used as a lab, and where students were brought to Lebanon to train with Palestinian refugees. The professor basically wanted to train her student in human rights interviews, but the problem is that they didn't tell people that this was the case. They told people we are here because we have a project that would benefit Palestinian women. And so people opened up and decided to talk to them. Unfortunately, the story was not this case. It was just a training course for her students. The problem with this experience is that academics and researchers tend to enforce their own discipline on people who have just fled a war and are worried about their own survivals. Okay. Finally, there should be no denial about the differing roles that fixers can play in knowledge creation, both good and bad. Clearly, if a scholar or journalist doesn't speak Arabic, the fixer and translator has an added element to whatever is being fed into the notebook. The creation of an X knowledge is no longer a free flow or a one-to-one interaction devoid of an additional perspective. Fixers and translators are the invisible hand that alter the process of knowledge production in various ways. The knowledge production act takes place outside the control of the researcher or the journalist. Depending on the integrity of the fixer or translator, the process of collecting information